Hello, and welcome back to the Games Institute podcast. And this is a pretty special episode because not only do we have special guest Jenn Rickert here, but this is the last time we will be recording the podcast for 2020. And as we know, 2020 has been quite the year, so I expect this will be quite the episode. So Tobin, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Marisa Benjamin, but Tobin, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Tobin. I'm here.
And Jenn, who are you?
I'm Jenn. I'm also here. Yes, I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in English at the University of Waterloo. And, surprise, surprise, also studying video games.
Great. Well, we usually dive in with our icebreaker question. So let's start with that right off the top. What is your earliest childhood memory of gaming?
I actually have a perfect answer for this because it comes up more often than it should. My earliest strong memory of gaming probably is Christmas time when I got my Sega Genesis back in like 94. When did that come out? The Genesis came out in 92? Something like that.
I'm not a Genesis
Anyway.
kid.
That was my first personal console, so it's something that is like embedded in my brain, and these two know by this point, I'm pretty sure, but I will share that I talk about Sonic quite a bit as a fave collection that I continue to buy on every single platform I have at my disposal. I did play Nintendo before that, but like burned into my brain is the many, many hours of Sega, so I'm going to go with that as my answer.
It was released in 89.
Really? So I got it in like 90 then, because it was like the Sonic 2 special edition pack, because I didn't actually have Sonic 1. As a fun addition, I'd like to add in, it's interesting that I'm doing the last podcast of the year, because I also did the first brown bag of the year, which is I think like back when we were still in a physical space, I was the first brown bag of 2020, and now I'm the last podcast of 2020.
I feel like that was 3 years ago.
I know.
It might as well have been.
Was that your modding brown bag?
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that does feel like it was a long time ago.
It was literally in January, so.
Not this calendar year. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, once we're already talking about that, once you've brought that up, I wonder if we can get a quick overview of your PhD research in general and your current program. Usually we'll dive into the meat of that a little bit later on, but that context, I feel like it'll help with our listeners get to know you a little faster.
Sure. So the brown bag talk, completely separate from my actual research, because I have been known to be in a myriad of different things, much to my detriment, I'm convinced, in terms of finishing on time. However, my PhD research is predominantly surrounding World of Warcraft, which is actually what my background is from the current expansion for, and looking at competitive high-end raiding environments where tensions are really high, people get really bitter, super critical of each other, etc., and how that works in with social dynamics, particularly with regard to gender dynamics and power structures and all sorts of fun keywords like that. But the gist is I look at how people get super ragey at each other in competitive gaming environments. I might dive into some Overwatch with that too, but predominantly I'm looking at PvE, so player versus environment content, rather than player versus player content.
Interesting. Do you find that that's pleasant for you?
So I am the classic case of make your research fit what you're doing as opposed to make the other way around. So I've been playing World of Warcraft pretty much straight through with minor breaks here and there since 2007. So for me, the research comes out of personal experience, shock. Because while I've had a plethora of wonderful experiences, and I absolutely love the guild I've been with for over 10 years now, there was a very pocket frame of time where we had a lot of toxic, or as the industry would like to say, problematic player behavior that really broke me in a way that I never would have expected to happen. And I got very emotional about that at my dissertation proposal defense, actually, in terms of talking about the passionate reason why I went down this road. but what drives me through it is the goal for making change. So the idea is that if I can get to the root cause of some of these issues, why these kind of behaviors develop and why they're not necessarily encouraged but not discouraged necessarily in the right ways, that we can hopefully find a way to break through it, and ideally get Blizzard to potentially implement things to actually help it from their end too, because it won't work if it's just coming from the community. So fun is relative. Fun in that I will hopefully get the satisfaction of trying to solve it.
Yeah, I find that very admirable.
I had a follow-up. So you're looking at primarily player versus environment games, but you use the term competitive. What about PvE is competitive when that's typically a PvP aspect?
Yes, the wonderful world of metrics. So competitive, there's a bunch of different aspects of PvE content that is competitive. Predominantly the first rung and like the top tier is like the world first race, which is what happens when a new tier of rating is released every like 6-ish months.
Is that
And you have
the season idea?
Yes, it's like the season idea. So basically you have all of these guilds around the world pushing for their top number charts, right? So they're trying to get ranked. The world first, right, is whoever gets the end boss down first. It was actually, this tier started off more difficult, which is actually nice. A lot of the first raids in an expansion have been pushovers, so there was actually a bit of a struggle. People get really into it because it's like the PvE side of esports, where it's like a race to get that done. There's a smaller scale Mythic Plus dungeons, which are kind of like time trials with increased modifiers. So you can do like the regular dungeon is just a mythic difficulty, and then you get a keystone that scales up depending on how fast you can clear it. So if you clear it super fast, you can get it to +3. So say you'll be like at a +5 and you get +8 if you clear it in the +3 timer.
Okay,
so
cool.
People, and those are 5-person ones. There's a Mythic Dungeon Invitational that Blizzard runs as well, where you have teams that, blast through this content and they're super min-maxy. The area that I'm looking at touches on that too, but it's kind of in that what has been labeled as Blizzard actually is like mid-core.
Okay.
As opposed to hardcore. We're like semi-hardcore. The idea is only like the top like 10% of the population actually raids like at all. So the vast amount of the player base doesn't get that competitive with each other. And we're looking at like, I think our guild is like top 500 US or something. Like we're still doing well. And we were very, very successful at the end of last expansion. But it's almost in that semi-hardcore thing where you have a lot of hardcore people brushing up against more casual people that causes more tensions and more criticism, because the hardcore people get frustrated with people who aren't doing what they're supposed to do, but meanwhile aren't necessarily wanting to put in the effort to be in the fully hardcore realm. So where those people get sponsorships and stuff, right? So yeah.
Okay,
long-winded explanation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense from some of the games that I played with like Destiny and whatnot. There's kind of those similarities there. So let's jump back to your academic history. Where did you start? Are you another Triple Crown U Waterloo student, or did you kind of jump over from another institution?
Yes, I am nearly a quintuple crown at this rate.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been at the University of Waterloo almost actually slightly longer than I've been playing World of Warcraft. I was going to say the other way around, but no. So I started in 2005 at the University of Waterloo in a jack of all trades, jumping around arts until I finally settled on my first degree main focus, which was classical history. I did dabble in English at that time. I dabbled in anthropology. I dabbled in history, and just kind of couldn't get anything to stick until classics. And then I did a speed run anthropology degree following that. So in that it was only 2 years because you can carry over credits. Concurrent degree, I think it's officially called. So yeah, classics, then anthropology. I did public issues anthropology as my master's. And then somehow English let me come in with no direct English training other than what was going on in my my first undergrad. However, my master's thesis was on 3D printing and artifact analysis, and I looked at it from like a semiotics perspective. So I think that's what really sold it. Kind of looking at how we imbue objects with meaning through words and ideas and that kind of thing. So that's probably my gateway into sneaking in to doing English.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how does that relate to what you're currently studying? Like, is what so your current PhD focus, is that like a passion, or does it build and connect with your anthropology and classics background?
So for me, pretty much all of the work I do academically, I sum up to be some continuation of looking at people, technology, and culture. So through English, they have their version of participant observation, right? Except it's more like personal narratives, right? It's the same kind of idea, just with a different spin. So for me, I'm constantly looking at how people interact with the technology, as well as how the technology then reflects back on people, and how culture kind of develops around it in those contexts. And so even kind of looking at the modding brown bag talk I gave, which is also on our YouTube channel, it also delves into that, because you're looking at, how modding is perceived in a cultural realm, depending on the kind of game you're looking at. So for me, the linchpin in all of it, and where I feel very blessed to be able to arguably study almost anything I want underneath that umbrella, because there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. And I think a lot of tech companies and tech individuals get really excited about the technology, which is great, but they don't necessarily consider the like social impacts of it. And a lot of social sciences tend to be more ingrained a little bit too heavily in the like people separate from technology, and there's a lot more overlap. So it's a really fun nexus and a really diverse nexus to work from.
Yeah. Wow, that was a great explanation. And your explanation earlier about like why you're motivated to do this PhD research despite the fact that it has a heavy emotional burden on you is fascinating too. I'm seeing how everything connects. And I mean, I kind of want to just jump in with this question right off the bat. I mean, even though it's kind of jumping around a little bit, but honestly, like my head is spinning too much and I really just want to know what is your method for trying to understand why people feel competitive?
So it's tricky, right? Because you don't participant observation, and also like survey research and all that other kind of more quantitative, qualitative areas are really difficult to get people to reveal the actual truth of what they think and how they feel versus what they think you want them to say or what they feel like they should say. So that's where the participant side of it helps, where you can just kind of make casual observations about like while you're just kind of naturally living in that space. The problem is for me, and something I was actively tackling pre-COVID and now am finding other ways to do so, is expanding my personal network. So because I've been a part of the World of Warcraft community for so long, I have a lot of connections close to me. But in order to get at some of the more widespread issues and that kind of thing, I'm trying to connect with those who are outside of my spheres of influence, even past the third and fourth degree if I can. So the past 2 years before this year, obviously, the G actually helped facilitate me going to BlizzCon, which was wonderful, to be able to actually, network with people hands-on, to be able to get them to tell me their own stories. And usually the way I would go about it is just kind of lightly bringing up what my dissertation topic is, and kind of in various terminology, depending on who I was speaking with. And people who have experienced trauma related to those kinds of environments, or feel like they have never really found a niche group to fit with, which is very common. And luckily, my guild tends to be a haven for people that they continue to come back to, which is really great. But they tend to just start talking about it, right? People get really interested in doing so. Blizzard themselves, which I haven't really mentioned as the developer of World of Warcraft, has actually run some panels at BlizzCon as well, talking about these kinds of issues, which sadly were not as well attended as I would have liked to see. But I know in 2018, they had one that was called Play Nice, Play Fair. And it was kind of talking about their own internal strategies. And it was really nice to see that they are thinking about these things. But a lot of what they're dealing with is kind of the machine learning side of it. So I kind of want to look more at the people side of it, of how they can work on that culture. And Overwatch, as a comparison, and this is where it will likely come up in the dissertation, has started a commendation system. It's kind of a trophy thing. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, that you get free XP for it. But the idea is supposed to help people vote their teammates for doing a good job, either in calling shots, or just being a good team player, or being sportsmanship like. And I actually was able to talk to one of the executives. Thanks to BlizzCon, they have they call it the inclusion space, which is a lightly lit, really chill area of BlizzCon, away from the super chaotic, convention floor. It's kind of a nook off to the side. They run trivia games, they give away free stuff, and executives from the company, from various levels, including like the top tier ones and just like your average like CSR, talk about their stories in like 15-minute lightning talks. And they're not recorded or put through the virtual ticket at all. So you actually have to be there. So for me, having those kinds of spaces to be able to have face-to-face conversations with somebody who you might not even know is actually invested in these things, because, it's not like they're listed on any of the big talks on YouTube for promotional materials, or you might stumble upon them on Twitter, but there's something particularly special about being in that BlizzCon environment to be able to interact with people. So for me, to get back to the methodology question of it, it's about expanding to as many perspectives as I can gather, while still tying it to my personal experience, because naturally, it comes out of that personal narrative, participant observation training that I do have. But I am endeavoring my best to get as many multitudes of volunteered stories as I can. So that way, it isn't just my story, it's also me demonstrating that it is a wider spread issue, and a wider spread issue than just internally to, my circle of people.
Very cool.
So you started at U Waterloo in 2005. You started playing WoW in 2007. Where from that point did you realize, hey, I can start researching this and use all this time as previous research? And then that tangentially ties into, when in your U Waterloo adventure did you connect with the Games Institute?
So I have been casually trying to write about World of Warcraft in my academic studies probably since 2008. I have a bunch of papers that I could probably dig up that are horribly written in comparison now, about any topic I could think of. I have also written just on gaming in general. It was really, really common. I know in one of my English classes, I think I actually wrote about BioShock at the time, because it was like relatively new, and it was, I think, English of sci-fi or something like that, and it worked really well. But I would say, like, at least once every 2 years since that first undergrad, I've definitely written a paper or a project or something, even just mentioning WoW. There was one of my favorite ones of those actually was in my anthropology degree. We had one of the 400 level classes that we were taking apart an old computer, and each of the groups in the class got a part from that computer, and we had to like trace the history of that part, like where it was developed and all these other things. And we were supposed to write like a research paper alongside it, and it was up to us how we tied it together. So for me, my partner and I, we wrote about gold farming.
Okay.
And about Foxconn at the same time. So it was kind of a matched up narrative of the perceived false dichotomy between like somebody who might be locked in doing like gold farming versus like what the Western person would be, and how they're treating each other, and the false perceptions there, and the racism that's tied into it too, which has sort of died off, but like not really. And then tying that to like the history of this, I think we had a stick of RAM or something. But it was really, really interesting to do, and like kind of exploring those aspects made me want to do it more. So I continued to write about it. I've written for a few game journalism websites over the years too. I've intermittently run my own blog as well, and a bunch of other things. So like I have clearly been expressing it, and it was just kind of it kicked in one day. I was like, you know what? Let's do it for everything I have. And originally, I was actually, no surprise, aiming for an anthropology PhD, but it didn't end up going that way, which I'm very grateful for now. So I took a year off in between my MA and the current PhD. And I went to a talk, actually, that had Amy Morrison and Jen Whitson, both of which are now on my committee, and another person, I think, from CS, who I regretfully can't remember his name. But it was a talk at KPL, and I was like super interested in what they were talking about. And ultimately ended up getting me into this program. And it was during the meet and greet for the PhD program that I sat and talked to Neil, the director of the Games Institute, for far too long at the grad house. And he encouraged me to actually come to the GI well in advance of me actually starting the program. So when I was still technically, in the summer before I even started the PhD, I was sitting in on his graduate Lord of the Rings class. And just like hanging out, and I got my fob, and I was already like onboarded before I was technically even like back in the program. It was such a wonderful experience. I don't think I've ever, despite being on campus as long as I have, so this is saying something, felt as at home in a place as I did walking into the GI for the first time.
That's
I
nice.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just for the listeners out there, KPL stands for Kitchener Public Library. And also, fun fact, Jen Whitson and Amy Morrison are both GI faculty members. So it's funny that, you went to this talk with GI members, and then that's what led you to do the PhD. And then it was Neil who clinched the GI connection.
He's a
great.
good salesman for the GI.
Yeah. It's very cool to see how you express like all of these different epistemologies that you've collected over the years, and you put them into your research, because it is so completely different, but it's not at all. It's just different materiality, right? Like instead of looking at the 3D printed physical objects, you're now looking at digital spaces, and you're bringing in this connection with people. I think that's fascinating. And again, like cannot emphasize enough how admirable it is that you're putting yourself into these positions so that you can create a better future for a lot of people. Yeah.
There's a lot of hardships that I, without realizing it, went through. I mean, it's my perspective on the gaming world is very clear, despite the horrible, more toxic ends that break into the regular public sphere more often than we'd like to see. But I am very keenly aware of it, and it's something that I don't want current and younger generations to have to go through, because it was not great. And there are certain things that like I now, even looking back, I'm like, wow, like I can't believe that I might have not addressed things that were targeted at me at the time or whatever, because I just was like, I need to survive in this environment, and therefore I'm just going to develop a really thick skin. And I did. But so many people and women and women identifying people in general have really felt that brunt over the years of the gatekeeping and all this other backlash that the more work we do to stop that from continuing, the better.
I'm curious about your choice of object texts like World of Warcraft and Overwatch. And I mean, I think it's somewhat obvious because you've talked about your personal connection to them, but there are still so many other games out there. So do you mind walking us through like how you decided to stick with your selection, and if there were any other games that you considered, why you maybe aren't including those?
Yes, I will definitely say that for the most part, to get at what I want to look at, it would have to be a multiplayer game, and regretfully, that cuts out a lot of really interesting content. So, like as I mentioned, from my various classes that I have continued to write about things, I've written about Undertale extensively. I've written about The Sims. I've written about Mass Effect. I've written about BioShock. I've written about like a lot of super intense, like narrative-driven games and like player experience games that like Undertale will continue to like be a super example for me. What Remains of Edith Finch is also, you know, like an absolutely phenomenal game that I see so many really cool things I want to talk about. And that's why I continue to, you know, write side projects and advocate for blog spaces and things to that effect to be able to talk about stuff that doesn't quite fit into my dissertation. But pulling from that, then the multiplayer sphere, I need to be I need to manage my expectations in terms of what I can actually do. And because I do have this commitment to my rating guild. As I said, I've been a part of them now for over 10 years. I've been in a position of authority in that guild for most of that time. And I have a minimum commitment of 8 hours a week to them. Usually more because I'm an officer and we have to deal with all sorts of fun drama that happens. As well as like we're supposed to be like, you know, the example that others hold themselves to, right? So I can't complain at somebody if they're not doing something if I'm also not doing that thing. So there's a time constraint there. There's partially an interest level too, because for me, I myself am a very competitive person in a gaming space. I will be the person who will full clear things and get all the trophies or achievements or whatever, even if I want to flip my chair in doing so. I will push through that. So for me, I shy away from certain games because they make me too mad. This is where a lot of the player versus player content upsets me. It's why I don't actually play it in World of Warcraft, because to me it's too imbalanced. I like it in Overwatch because it's designed around team building space, but I won't be playing the there's like a free-for-all mode in Overwatch that I won't touch because it makes me too mad.
Rumble? I don't know what it's called now.
Yeah, either way, right? Like, and it's the same reason I won't be playing Smash, right? Like Smash would arguably be a perfect example on the side and something that I will probably likely draw in just as like examples in other spaces. But again, it's that like, I don't think I could keep my head cool enough to deal with player versus player content to analyze it. Player versus environment, then, you know, Tobin brought up Destiny would be one that's in there too. I don't know enough about that scene to be able to describe it, but pretty much any time that people have rankings in mind, it could technically be applicable. So it's not to say that I've necessarily excluded any other title insofar as I have a better familiarity with Overwatch and Blizzard in particular, or World of Warcraft in particular. But if something comes up, as they continue to do sometimes on news feeds, I bookmark it and set it aside as like, this is something that's potentially useful.
That's a great explanation. And because you mentioned that you're advocating for more discourse about this, you know, through blogs, I'm curious about, like, maybe that's the answer, but I'm curious about how you're going to take all of this research that you're working on and put it out into the world and help maybe inspire other scholars. Are you interested in that? Are you interested in actually collecting all this research and dumping it onto the desks of other folks at Blizzard who maybe aren't considering these things, other industries? What's your thoughts on knowledge mobilization after?
All of it. So something that really stuck with me and why I will always advocate for the public issues anthropology masters here at the University of Waterloo is that they really focus on knowledge mobilization. The whole principle of, you know, public issues anthropology is that you need to make your research be applicable to people, right? Like, it's all well and good that we study really interesting stuff and like 6 lines of poetry in like a 100-page document, but not all people are necessarily going to benefit from that, right? Or even necessarily see the value in it. And it's not to devalue the work itself. It's rather to try and frame our research in more approachable ways for people to be able to actually utilize. So my ultimate goal, not just in terms of my professional life, but also in terms of my research life, is to, if not directly work exclusively in alt-ac or professional non-academic environments, it's also to be a bridge between the two, because there's a lot missing there. They tend to kind of focus on their own stuff, and there are some partnerships, but there's not enough open access to the research or things that they can actually translate to each other. And it's just, there's so much value for them to talk to each other. So my hope is to be able to develop and present this research in a way that ideally will be directly related to Blizzard, but hopefully will also have a larger thread that could be applicable to any company that wants to kind of look at these things. And I am hoping there's one of the connections I made last year that was very interested in what I was looking at, and regretfully, to keep bringing up COVID, prevented us from seeing each other this year at BlizzCon. But she's a phenomenal person, super inspiring story herself. So I'm hoping to be able to touch base with her more to actually be able to get some of my research directly into their hands. But if not, I very much like writing in editorial blog style formats, and am slowly developing my own website in addition to stuff for the GI. To be able to have that outlet. So basically, if somebody gives me a place to throw a bunch of words, very opinionately, I'm happy to do so, because the more I can share, the better. Same thing on Twitter, etc. When I'm on there in spurts, to be able to share it, because I think it's really important. And the more we talk about things, the better it is for everybody. And most of these issues stem from people not talking to each other, or just not being open to talk in general. You don't have to necessarily agree, but you should at least listen.
So I have a question. You might not have an answer to this, but so dealing with WoW as a digital space, I remember in our game studies course with Neil, we watched a chunk of the first episode of The Guild, right? And it was kind of the crossing of the separate digital space into the personal physical space. And so thinking of that with PvE, have you played anything like D&D where it's collaborative but it's still competitive? Are there similarities between the two, physical versus virtual kind of PvE collaborative guild party type situations?
Yes, but I would not have put two and two together until you asked me this question. So yes, I have played D&D, as unfortunately many D&D groups have experienced.
Yeah.
The scheduling and ongoing campaigns can be an issue. It's why I'm such a fan of one shots, because at least then that's all the time you have to schedule for. Suffice to say, my dice have not been used in a while. Anyway, interestingly, yes. Insofar as people tend to still kind of take on their roles. To continue to harp on BlizzCon, my guild has made it a habit to actually go together. So increasingly since 2017, 18, 19, yeah. So those 3 years, we basically exponentially grew in terms of our attendance. So the first year we had about 8 of us go. The next year it was like 16. And last year I think we had like 30 something people total scattered. So if we would have gone this year, I'm sure it would have been like 50. But it's really interesting to see how our roles in the guild that we normally take on, kind of in terms of leadership, etc., and like managing people and coordinating events and stuff like that, translates in person in a way that it's like, these are like what we do in game. Like, this isn't necessarily who we are in these environments. And like our guild master, for example, who's like absolutely phenomenal in terms of sparking. We call him the guild cheerleader effectively, but he gets us swag and like is super engaged in promoting things like the guild's birthday and like all sorts of fun stuff like that. And like, he gathered all of us officers who were there and like equally coordinated us to coordinate our own things. And like people would like look to us to do stuff, and it's like we're all just people here, right? So and even the personalities that are tied to like characters sometimes, that you're like, I see now why you play this character. And the characterization of classes is just like, I have an ongoing joke with a bunch of people in the World of Warcraft community that I'll share here, to call us #ShamFam, because we play shamans, right? So the Sham fam. And one of them will actually like see me at BlizzCon and be like #ShamFam. I'm like, all right. Fair. But it's funny because like I swear I've never met a person who played a shaman that I didn't like. Like that we all get along. And like that's been my class, right? And I've dabbled in other ones. I enjoy other ones, but like shaman is my home class. And I have always gotten along to some capacity with those. So it's really interesting to see like how those characterizations connect with real people in that way, which is as close to the answer of that question as I have.
No, that was great. I love that. I love the idea of you always get along with people who play the same class. There's lots to think about there.
On that front, can you guess what I play in D&D?
Druid.
Cleric.
Closer on Marisa. I played a hybrid.
Oh.
I played a hybrid.
I don't know what does shaman do in WoW. I guess druid because shaman
it's a buff
seems like a
class.
pet master.
It's a buff class.
Oh, a bard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm super big on the charisma roles and making sure that I can talk my way through situations as well. I also am super big into RP in D&D too, right? And that's something that not all people will take up. So I think that's also what translates to me navigating people in real life at a place like BlizzCon. Because I'm like, all right, this is what we're doing. Let's talk to this person. Let's find out how we get access to this. There's actually quests and stuff at BlizzCon you can do where you get like a little card, and if you get it filled out, you can like get in a draw or like get some free stuff or whatever. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, that's cool how you just have this complete synthesis of like your work, your approach, your game, your play style. I don't. My play style is melee, so I hope that doesn't translate into a work environment.
I was actually going to say you only need to play 1 or 2 one-shots with Marisa to know exactly what kind of character she plays.
Every time.
It's although like super chaotic, neutral, go in guns blazing. If I die, I die, but that's okay.
Like I was the sorcerer one time that just was not strong at all, and I still played the exact same way. Yeah. So you gotta stick with who you are. Yeah.
It's okay. I play this myself.
So I'm curious now to see if we can hit, like we've already hit the trifecta, of how your game style fits with your research and then how that fits with your history. But now let's tie in like what you do at the Games Institute. Let's talk about that, and then we'll figure out how that all connects to make this the complete picture.
Yeah, so it's still like, again, from that fun nexus of people, technology, and culture. So we're talking about my position, yes, at the Games Institute. Okay, so my position at the Games Institute, in addition to being a student, is the Community Experience Curator, which effectively is trying to bring people together at the Games Institute across technological, sociocultural, etc. demographics to really foster the community that Neil and Agata have envisioned for so long. So we have pockets of it, right? We have tons of people who embody the spirit of the GI. The problem is that they're not always talking to each other. And so my goal coming in is to, over time, because it takes a long time, right? Like a project like this can take, a minimum of 3 to 5 years to really set in stone, because you don't want to force people to do things, right? You just want to slowly encourage them to like, this is the GI. So my goal is to really bridge all of these different communities into a larger sense of what it means to be a part of the GI, right? It's not just a matter of having a space. It's not a matter of being able to like, have access to resources. Like there needs to be something that is the spirit of it, that's an actual lived experience. And that's something that we as a I was going to say a profession team. That's not the right word. As an admin team are building internally, right? Like we're developing what we want to see. And my goal is to try and put systems in place that gets developed on its own. So that's working in tandem with one of our other members, Kaylee, to kind of look at the social networking component in terms of bridging both Slack and Discord to have people interact with each other across various lines. I try to run a myriad of different social events of different kinds. We have our coffee and toast that has been a longstanding tradition at the GI.
A legacy.
Yes, a longstanding one since the very earliest days that we were really happy to be able to continue in the online forum, which very quickly became endearingly named Coffee Rants, because for the most part, people just needed to vent about their lives in COVID environments. But it was a really nice release for people. I had quite a number of people come to me in DMs and in separate voice calls saying they really looked forward to it as well. And we've also added, like, there were some yoga mornings we did there. We've done some game sessions together. we had a really great Halloween party, and we'll be having another one on Christmas. And it's a matter of just kind of making sure that there's something that people can see of themselves in the GI. The best way to get people to really invest their energy and their engagement in something is to have it kind of be a mirror to reflect parts of themselves that therefore they feel a sense of belonging, right?
Mhm.
So we need to really put into place as a community, which I'm trying to, various little tools that I have written out in way too many documents to bring out now, but to really have it be something that, like, yes, I belong to the GI first, and not like I am an engineering student first, right? Or I'm an art student first. We want it to be like I am a GI member first, and then I happen to do all these other things. And ideally, in terms of the knowledge mobilization, in terms of interdisciplinary interactions, ideally, if people are used to interacting with each other socially, they will be more inclined to work with each other professionally, academically, whatever, and have more collaborations take place because they'll have that degree of familiarity. And that way, those barriers that normally take place for methodologies and things like that between arts and sciences more broadly are easier to break through because they have the social component there too, right?
Yeah.
So whereas if they just come to it and they're cold and they're like, I do it quantitatively, I do it qualitatively, it's like, why not do both? Right? Yeah, so like that's kind of what I'm focusing on is, the super not daunting task of breaking down barriers between arts and sciences. But generally kind of developing, sorry, my cat's like walking in front of the screen. Generally trying to develop the spirit of the GI in a lived way.
For the listener who is tuning in because they saw, the title, which will be something along the lines of talking, Blizzard and online communities, we'll figure out the title. But for the listener who has no context about the Games Institute, can you complete the sentence, the spirit of the GI is blank?
Is home. Is It is honestly home. It's like, where your Hearthstone is set. It's a place where people can come together no matter what they are studying, no matter what their background might be, no matter what level of education they're at, whether or not they're a part of just the community or not. Like, they don't necessarily even have to be involved in academia. Everybody has a home at the GI if they have interest in games, not even just video games, right? We've been talking a lot about those, but board games too, card games, D&D, etc., right? It has a space for everybody who has interest in this material, and it fosters inclusion, creativity, and I, as I said earlier, have never felt so welcomed in a space, especially in my academic and professional life, as I have at the Games Institute. And for me, it has so much meaning of a safe haven that I think it is paramount that we continue to succeed. And I want to share it with as many people from as many rooftops as I can shout. Because there's really something special at the Games Institute. So I would say it's home, and it's potentially home for whoever also finds themselves drawn to what we do and who we are.
That's great. That's very lovely. We will package that up and put that into quote material for the website somewhere.
It makes me miss the GI more.
Oh. Before I toss it to Tobin to hand you over with one of our concluding questions, I wanted to do a brief COVID check-in because, COVID started in March, which was more or less, it was a little after when you really started picking up on Discord and trying to amp this up. So in a way, your role was just like magnified. It became so crucial so quickly. And then, that must have been a lot of pressure for you. So I don't know if you want to like catch us up on what that type of experience was like, being responsible for ushering in this online community in a time when we've never needed an online community more urgently.
Yeah, that was a fun surprised. So the idea of Discord as a backbone for social communications at the GI started in like September, right, of last year. And we really, like, I was working kind of in a beta phase and like, or alpha at that point, and kind of inviting a handful of people to trial and error some stuff.
Mhm.
And we were like planning on having like a official launch by September of this year with a kind of soft launch in the summer. We'll
September
invite some
2020,
people,
yeah.
right? Like, see how it goes. Thank, whatever deity we want to, or just the sky, that I had the onboarding mess sorted out in time, because as you said, March hit and suddenly everybody was at home and we needed a way for people to really interact. And we have run a lot of really awesome events like the GI Jam we had in the summer, which is a game development mad rush contest thing. That's an international event for, I guess, those who don't know.
Well, it wasn't previously an international event at the GI,
Oh.
but because of your Discord, it became an international event.
Yes. But that's the thing, right? Is that we were able to have people from all over the world. We had somebody from the Ukraine for sure, who was in there. And like, we had a really cute, like, she like 10-year-old or something that also was able to participate. And it was this like super interesting thing that was able to continue because of the Discord, the way we had set it up, but also was able to bring in all these new avenues. And that's kind of the spirit of what I want the Discord window to be. It's kind of like at the Games Institute, we have this collaboration space where during the regular 9 to 5 hours, people can come in and like, they usually get toured around, etc. But it's like relatively open for the university to come and see what we're doing. And that's kind of what I wanted the spirit of the Discord to be as well. It's that open space where we can interact with people who aren't necessarily, hardcore academia. We can involve people from other schools, from other disciplines, from various things, who might even just be interested in what we're doing, even if they don't study it themselves. So a lot of that had to be developed really quickly. And it was really fun to do so. There was a lot of trial and error. There's a few private channels that I have effectively yelled at the bots when they weren't doing what they were supposed to. But ultimately, it's fine. We've come to terms with each other. They're now working for the most part. But you're right. It did put a spotlight on something that the Discord server was only ever supposed to be like the gateway, starting point of the larger vision that I have for this position, as well as like for this project more broadly, which I'm glad it was able to get ironed out so fast, because I think there's a lot of things that we weren't necessarily able to, or we wouldn't have been able to develop as quickly without the pressure of COVID. Equally, I would have liked to potentially have a bit more groundwork in terms of describing its use, because a lot of people developed their own conclusions and their own pathways, which is totally fine for themselves, but wasn't really the vision that I had. And that's a little harder to correct when you're dealing with a virtual space exclusively. Also in terms of not being able to have like our formal town hall, right, the way we normally would, to be able to talk about these things openly. There's a lot of wonky things that I think we've, as an institute, and also for myself, done very well, all things considered. One thing I will say that's been tricky for me is that in my World of Warcraft experience, as well as just like my general diving into tech most of my life, I have lived in virtual spaces for a very long time, and I am extremely comfortable with navigating, video calls all the time and voice chats that I'm actively on, and things like Discord and social media and all these other things. Very, very comfortable living in those spaces. And not only have I had to increasingly be conscientious of how to translate my knowledge into ways that are helpful for others, but also to be extra cautious in making sure that I'm not unintentionally shoving people into spaces that they're not comfortable with yet. Which is hard, because a lot of the people that I interact with in those spaces normally are also very comfortable in them. Ironically, I've had to have the opposite at something like BlizzCon, where I've had to like coax people into like the wild of real life when they're normally so comfortable online. There's a handful of people who we met at BlizzCon that I was like, wow, you are even more introverted in real life than I would have ever expected online. Like they'll be the person who's like the talk of the server, right? Like they're always chatting, super chatty on voice, and then you see them in person and they're like, you know, super great people, but like that goes both ways, right? There's people who are also like that in a digital space that are super exuberant in person, but they don't know how to like navigate it. Heaven forbid, you know, going into department meetings where people don't mute their microphones. All these kinds of things that are like second nature to me. So it's been really great to actually be able to help people to navigate these spaces in a way that I am very comfortable with, because it's not a skill set that I expected to be able to utilize that way. So it's been stressful, but in a fun way, because that's academia for you. Fun stress, as opposed to mind-numbing, you know, comp stress.
Yes.
Don't remind me. All right. So besides WoW, besides the obvious, what games have you been playing through COVID? What's something that's currently occupying your mind that you're itching to get back to?
Other than WoW.
Other than WoW.
To be fair, that one just had an expansion release, so that's harder to get around. I've been playing a lot intermittently. I play a lot of online games with my partner because he lives 5 hours away. So we tend to set games aside to specifically play together. For the most part through COVID, it was Borderlands 3.
Excellent.
With the various DLCs along the way. We do play Overwatch and now World of Warcraft together, but that's a separate conversation. I've played a few standalone games, for the most part, actually on my PS4, including an extensive foray into Skyrim VR, because Skyrim can never die at this point. But Skyrim VR was a wild experience, and I would love to actually get back into it sometime in the nearer future. And I also would like to play it not on the PS4 because I want it to be in better graphics. But, you know, something, for example, you know, you're diving into ruins or whatever, and like you're doing on the computer, it's third person, you're just kind of chilling. And there's really pretty stuff going on, but you don't feel it the same. In VR, there was one of them that I went into, and you're walking into it, and like I play like horror games, watch a lot of horror movies, but I don't like being the person in that position, because like I wouldn't make those stupid choices in real life, right? So like I wouldn't go into this place, so therefore the game will never start. So I walk into this ruin, and it's like spooky, whatever, Dwemer ruin, and like an orb comes up, like these walls lock around me, and the orb like circles me, and as it's circling me, I see there's like dead bodies here, and I'm like, cool. And then the floor lets out. And when you're sitting there in VR, like I had to look up because like I couldn't look down like as it's crashing through, right? Like I just couldn't do it. And I was like, oh God, like when is this gonna stop? And I've only ever experienced that at something like, you know, one of the rides at Disney or whatever. So it was really fun to have access to something like VR. So like I've been playing a lot of Beat Saber. I've been playing, like I played Skyrim VR. I downloaded the Doctor Who one. I have yet to play it, but like it looks pretty cool. Not in VR, but I played through the majority of Vampire. I haven't finished it, but I enjoyed it. I have some thoughts, but that's a whole separate podcast and or blog post. And I also played a really neat game that was like not augmented reality, but it was like, it's a game called Erica. I don't know if either one of you have heard of it. So it was it was like a PlayStation exclusive game that has a companion app on your phone, and it's like an interactive video, kind of like the Bandersnatch Netflix one, except you're doing it on your phone. So like it's a choose your own adventure style game that's like a narrative, but like it was weird. I liked it, but it was like it was a weird experience to like be playing something on PlayStation but playing it on my phone. Sims has been a thing on there.
Yes.
As always. Yeah, there's been a lot of like pick up and go games, but I think those are the biggest ones. Because for a large chunk of, oh, my cat's coming through again. For a large chunk of COVID, we were dealing with a really intense boss in World of Warcraft, and it got down to the wire in July and August, where we were basically raiding like 16 hours a week because we were running out of time. And if we didn't get it in time, we wouldn't have this prestigious achievement of pixels. So, super important. But it's a badge we wear proudly now. So
I have to pick up The Sims again. This is my takeaway for now.
they've had a lot of great inclusions even to the base game lately. And they recently released an expansion that's kind of like Japanese themed. So there's a lot of fun inclusions there that people are super hyped about. I've only dabbled in it a little bit because, again, the expansion came out. I'm trying to think there's anything else I've played. I feel like probably, but my brain is a goldfish when it comes to remembering things. I have a million apps that keep track of lists of things I've done because there's no way I would remember them.
Well,
But
how
those
about
are
this? How about this prompt then? What would be one game that you would recommend everybody in the world play, and why?
Oh, that's a totally easy question to answer.
This is actually our standard closing question, so don't worry, you're not the only one who's been subject to this.
That is a very difficult question. It depends on what I would want people to take away from it and or what I think would hit people the most. I think in terms of a story and or a game that has a lot of really interesting motifs and like stuff it plays with, I think Undertale would fit in that quite a bit. Undertale has a lot of really fun multi-layered things that happen in it. As a side, because I can't just decide on one, and it's technically not even one on its own, would be the Mass Effect trilogy, because I think the Mass Effect trilogy is phenomenal, and it's getting re-released, remastered soon, and that is actually on my list of something that as soon as the remastered edition comes out, I'm there. I guess technically during COVID, I also played a round of Kingdom Hearts, but like that's again another podcast. But yeah, I would say like in terms of like one standalone game, if I could only pick one, it would probably be Undertale, just because it's accessible enough. There's a lot of layers to it, and it's interesting on its own. And then like just as a general trilogy that I just absolutely adore and sticks with me emotionally in various peaks and valleys would probably be Mass Effect, because it's beautifully done. It's got a very, very good story. And no matter whether or not you like the endings, the fact that there's enough discussion about the endings to me shows that like they did a good job, because there's some degree of like, pitting people against each other for it. So plus Jennifer Hale is amazing, and FemShep is the only true Shep.
Have you met Jennifer Hale yet?
I haven't, but she's liked like 3 of my Twitter posts, so clearly we're like in line to be best friends.
Okay, so when Comic-Cons start up again, I have to keep better track of notifying you, because she's been at like 3 or 4 that I've been to, and half the time she's just like sitting there not doing anything.
Yeah, she's Canadian too.
Yeah.
I really want to, and actually one of the Twitter posts she liked, which I'm hoping to touch base on eventually, is she was talking about starting a Patreon and like what people would be interested in, and I brought up, I was like, hey, I would love the opportunity to have like academic conversations or like have academic liaison through something like a Patreon, because like it's not to say that we should merit any free time from people, so it's totally fair to me to be able to like pay into a Patreon to be like, hey, let's have a talk, or would you like to give a talk, or whatever. It's like the new version of paying people to come give talks, right? So yeah.
We'll talk to her, befriend her, and then make her a GI member.
Yeah, that's my goal. I have a few people on my GI recruitment list, and she's definitely one of them, because I feel like there's a glimmer of hope to do so.
Awesome. Well, on that note, it is time for us to say goodbye and to thank you so much for being on today. And goodbye 2020.
Yeah, goodbye 2020. Here's to 2021 and the speakeasies and all sorts of other fun things that we should expect, and fun dance moves and tassels and whatever the heck else. But yes, thank you for having me. Also super fun to, I guess, start off and I guess close off the year in time.
Yeah, the sandwich. Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you for making 2020 brighter, and we'll see you next year.
Sounds good.